Hello, everybody. We are welcoming Adrianne Lobel, fabulous set designer, painter, producer, artist all around, and a longtime collaborator and good friend. Adrianne Lobel, welcome.
Hi, Mark. It's wonderful to be here on Zoom with you.
I know, right? I haven't seen anybody outside of my Zoom circle for a long time, so you're new material, and I'm happy to see you. Anyway, um, let's talk about things that we have in common or that we worked with, or anything you can think of.
Mhm.
Like, for example, people like this, I can never remember exactly. How did you and I meet?
Well, I met you when I was presenting the model for Nixon in China to you. And you were very excited about it. And of course, mostly concerned about what was on the floor because you were going to do an on point red detachment of women ballet for the
Right.
second act. And you were very, very happy to hear that it was going to be dance floor.
And it
You
was, and it
remember?
worked. But I remember seeing your work first in Peter Sellers' productions at PepsiCo, the
Mhm.
uh, uh, the pair of those Mozart operas. Peter and I and you are good friends and collaborators. He worked with you before I did, but I guess Nixon was such a long time ago now, and it's lived on for so long. Then
Well,
we were lucky enough and happy enough and puzzled enough to do a bunch more productions over many years. It's been a while, but you've contributed so much toward the opera and dance evening shows that we've done over a long time. And I know that you've worked with many other directors operatically, Broadway, and dance and whatever. So please go with that a little bit. Fill us in on some of those.
oh, you really? I'd
That's
much,
broad. You don't have to.
I'd much rather talk about the stuff that we've done together.
Oh, okay. All right. Good.
Yeah, because I
You're
think
not
my
going to.
collaborations with you have been my favorite things that I've done. I mean, Plate and King Arthur. And King Arthur, for some reason, was not as popular as we hoped it would be, but it's one of my favorite things ever.
Me too.
Yeah.
We were talking about the other day with Jane Glover, with
Uh,
Dame Jane Glover.
oh, really?
Yes, she's a dame now. There's nothing like a dame. She's great. But we were talking about that, and she kept, because that's the one we did from scratch together.
Uh-huh.
Musically, it wasn't already done, and
Right.
then we had other things added
Right.
onto
You
it.
put it together. Yeah.
Yeah, it was from the ground up, and I loved it. It was semi-popular, but it went away. It's a show that I love so much, Henry Purcell. So that, hmm,
And
yeah, go ahead.
your early Orpheus, which was also very beautiful, and
Right.
in Galatea
Yeah.
and L'Allegro, and then of course the fabulous Hard Nut.
Yes. Oh, wait. How does the hard nut keep coming up in all the time? Yes, of course. That was a gigantic undertaking because a lot of people don't know that something like L'Allegro, the hard nut, Acis and Galatea, where there's sets involved, because I do a lot without sets because I'm a touring modern dance company when we're touring. Um, but that sometimes the space is divided by pieces, or I start staging something like the hard nut, I have to know the set already. The set design has to already be underway so we can tell the front door is back there and the ocean is over there. And if you go down to this line, you'll be cut in half by something that flies in.
Yeah.
So that's people don't know that it's not just like I made up a dance and now furnish it.
Right.
So it has to start very early.
Well, scenery is not plastered on. It's an integral part of the whole production. If
Yeah.
it's good, otherwise it's not good. And that was the difficulty with L'Allegro, is that we knew scene by scene what it was going to look like. But when we actually got into the theater and had to move the scenery from one place to the next, from one verse to the next, it was a colossal mess. And it needed incredible time and finessing, and a lot of technical time with a piano player to make it seamless, to make it
Right.
invisible, to make it a dancer. Our first meeting on Allegro was at the Gramercy Hotel. That's what it was. And we sat there and we talked about it. And you told me that you needed to have different spaces, shallow and deep. That was
Right.
basically what you said. And I was,
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, that's all right. I was left with this gigantic poem that had everything in it. It had forests, mountains, dark caves, populous cities, what else? Meadows, a cathedral, Orpheus and Eurydice. I
Yeah.
mean, it was impossible, really. And so the only way you could start thinking about it is abstractly, because if you started to design it literally, it was never going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Impossible. It would take
Yeah.
the whole night just to move the
Scenery.
right pilasters on or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing is, because it was the first project in Brussels and we wanted to make a big splash, is what have you got in mind? Something big? It's like, well, how about this? And I had no idea what I was going to do. So asking you to do that, and because it was our premiere production, we had so many incredible resources: the scene shop, the crew, a pianist to play for set change practice, which never happens anywhere in the world. But the thing is, because there were so many, do you want to talk about that, of the panels that come in and out, and then I'll say why,
Well,
what we had to do?
the set was inspired by Rothko, basically, because when you think abstract landscapes, you think Rothko. So I decided that the set should be like a moving Rothko painting, where one color affected another color, and there was an overlay of colors, and it could go from dark to light very quickly and change moods very quickly. So I spent a lot of time in my kitchen dyeing scrim, dyeing organza, which you use as scrim in models, and playing with color on top of color, and seeing, and making landscapes out of them, trees and meadows, and a horizon with the sea, and stripes for cathedrals and stripes for trees. And then what happened? What happened after that?
So it was a little bit Joseph Albert's, in just the combination of colors. But the thing is, to make that happen, there's something like 30 something scenes in Allegro. It's a full, long evening, and it changes tone so quickly because there's no linear narrative. So I wanted, for example, to be able to have a scary, dark, tunnel. And so that means it was opaque black all the way down stage, the scrim in front with a dancer with very little space in between. So we would put, pieces of lengths of wood on the floor to dance, to divide the space, and they were color coded to go with the scrims and drops. But the thing is, once a drop is in, you can't get through it. That's the point. So it had to be choreographed with all of these different centers and different depths. And then the wide open version for the two movements that are to moderato is nothing except, of course, the beautiful legs, and there's sort of a camera perspective. It's just the whiteness of everything with a backdrop. So it's fully open, and it's the only times that every single dancer is in a dance, and they're very sort of mathematical and neutral. So those are open, like Palladian whiteness,
right.
And then it can become at one point there's maybe 3 or 4 different things in colors, and so the opaque ones in various colors then have a scrimmy one, a see-through, translucent in front, or layers of that. Well, and so we had to build all of that in, and dancers couldn't hit their heads, and you have to be able to see everything from any seat in the theater. So it was very complicated, and you solved it. How did that work?
Well, when you put scrims in front of each other too close, they cause a really irritating moire effect. So that's when I decided that I should use translucent drops as well. And I had to
Mhm.
balance in depth what was scrim and what was translucent so that you would never get that moire effect, which we didn't.
Right.
The
I missed
translucent
it.
drops you can't see through, but the scrim drops you could see through.
Right.
You had to balance all of that as well.
Right. So one you can see through, one lets light through, and one doesn't. It
Right.
just takes light on it. So that's already complicated for
Yeah.
me, and it's our show. But also there are objects that are suspended, and it's all evocative in a way that helps you understand. I think it helps you understand the text and the music because that's what it looks like. And when I use dancers for, sort of props that, set dress, they're trees and shrubberies and,
Well, that's
a
I
lot of things.
that's what I love about working with you, Mark, is that there are no props. The dancers are the props.
I always start with props, but they're gone by like the
Oh
second
my
rehearsal.
God, you're so prop free compared
I
to
know. No, L'Allegro, a lot of people don't know this about L'Allegro, and I was crazy, but I thought I wanted little props to dance with, like handkerchiefs or sticks, like Morris dancing that you could
yeah,
use as a sword. And I had a beautiful idea and flowers and handkerchiefs, like little dancing things. I don't know, but I wanted flowers to appear by being dropped, sandbags of one fake flower in each, so they would just immediately pop up and surprise everybody. Then
uh-huh,
you have to get rid of them,
yeah,
etc. So it's like, you know what? The chorus is in the pit and there's no props. That's how it worked. We
right.
kept it as clear as possible and leave the dancing to the dancers and the music to the musicians.
And the scenery to the scenery. And
Yes.
you never told me about those props. You never bothered me about them. That was
Wow, that was smart.
a great thing. So we didn't have to go through having them made and then having them cut.
Exactly.
That was the great thing about working in Brussels, though, is that I brought the design. I designed more scenery than we needed because on Broadway, when you work on Broadway, you have to always do that because they cut the thing to smithereens.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you end up with what you want. And in order to end up with what you want, you have to add scenery. So there's something to cut. So I did that
Right.
with Allegro. I had all these plastic drops. Do you remember the plastic drops that had sort of Jackson Pollocky scribbles on them?
No, sorry, I don't.
There were a couple of those which I didn't want at all, but I thought, yeah, well, we'll cut them when the time comes.
Right.
I delivered the designs to Jürgen Hofer and left to go. I think I delivered the designs and then I was supposed to be back again in a couple of weeks. So I went to Venice in between, but I didn't hear anything from the theater. And when I contacted, they said, oh yes, we're building. And I said, no, stop, wait, you're not supposed to build. We're supposed to have a cutting session first. So fortunately they didn't build those drops, but yeah.
Well, and in Brussels, of course, the building where we work, where the dance studios were, and
Yeah.
offices and canteen was also a big scene shop in the back. So they were driving things and doing giant productions all over the place. So busy and such a great shop. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, we had those drops were actually sent out to Germany to be industrially dyed.
Hmm.
So we sent swatches of color and they sent them out and they came back exactly the right color and perfectly smoothly and evenly dyed. So they weren't painted. They were, dyed in some gigantic vat somewhere.
Right. Yeah, like your kitchen, like tiny
Like
doll furniture in your kitchen,
version
only
of that
giant.
thing. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then when we got into the theater, as I said, it was just a spectacular mess. And Gerard Mortier came over to me and said, Mrs. Lobel, because he always called me Mrs. Lobel. He said, what do you need? And I said, we need time. And unlike anywhere else in the world, he actually gave it to us. And we worked for, I think, like a week on getting those drops to hit exact points in the music, exact notes, at exact timings,
Right.
with the rehearsal pianist and the stage manager. Linda Dowdell was the rehearsal pianist, and Francois de Carpentries was the very good stage manager.
Right.
And Jim Ingalls and I worked incredibly intensely. And then you would come in the evening with the dancers, and we would make infinite little adjustments. Like Jim was just saying last night, I was talking to him, he said, you would drive us crazy because you would change something by 2 inches. And we'd say, well, what is that going to do? And then, of course, it made the whole thing work. Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad that turned out that way.
Yeah.
But one thing, going back to James F. Ingalls, lighting designer extraordinaire, with whom we've worked many, many times. The thing is that the instruments in Europe were different from what they. I don't know how that works, but it was a whole different palette and a different way of lighting it once we went on tour. But it's hard to light because of these so many. I'm going sideways now. So many levels of things and hitting each other. It's a very complicated thing, and really, the exciting part that we had to sort of nip in the bud was that you could like call the set moves live in the show every night, and it would never be the same twice because there are like hundreds of thousands of possibilities of these things. But the amazing, because it's also part computerized and part people pulling ropes, wasn't it?
Yes.
In Brussels.
Oh,
So that's complicated already. And then we have the pianist, Linda Dowdell, my wonderful music director at the time, would play these things, and you'd work forever to get the exact precise touchdown of the thing without a big clatter. So complicated. And we did have to finalize it so it could be a show that happened more than once. So it was amazing to have that time and all of that talent working together. And then, then we had to stick the dancers in between the places where they couldn't go. It was very complicated, very rewarding. And it makes beautiful, perfect sense where you're not like anything. It's like, oh, this is great, instead of what's that, who's that, where's that. Well, it just follows through.
If it didn't work, which it didn't at first, it was incredibly distracting, and we didn't know that it was going to work.
Right.
And it got to be very exciting when it started to work, and it was all about precision. It was all about using the set as a musical instrument, really, and hitting the drops at the end of a perfect bar of music, or being exactly the right height over a dancer's head.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of places where we have people going under it right before it honks them on the head. And of course, what people forget is that since it's live music, it's not exactly the same thing every time. So you can't just go, like Broadway shows very often have a timing, that's it, and the conductor's on a click track, so that it's really safely replicable every single night. And that can turn into tedium, but it's also gives you an incredible hit when everything goes at the same time. So that was, and then I was gonna say when we filmed it, actually just in any rehearsal in the theater, if I stop the whole thing, let's stop everybody, the orchestra grinds down, everybody stops, and then I have to say, let's go back, to this transition, which means everybody has to fly these things back where the crew does, back where they were. We find the orchestra, it's like, okay, go. And then somebody says, where are we starting again? So it's like, okay. Anyway, so we try not to stop too often these days anyway, when we do it. So anyway.
When you do it on tour now, there isn't a computerized system, right? Johan actually knows how to do it with just a fly system, right?
By heart.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I've seen it over the years, and when I watch it, many, many years after making it, I still know when a cue is a little slow or a little fast. I can still tell.
Right. Well, you're not supposed to watch that anymore, but that's of course, that's right.
Well, that's me.
Well, when you go to the ballet and somebody's ribbons come undone, that's what you're going to watch. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry, principals and soloists, but yes.
And one thing I wanted to say about the set, which is probably the most brilliant thing I've ever done, is, when you do drops, you always have a pipe pocket at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
You put a pipe inside, and there's sort of this lumpy thing at the bottom of every drop, which worked most of the time. But in this case, we were going to see those edges all of the time, and I didn't want that lumpy pipe shape. So engineered an exterior pipe, which also came in different colors. So you got this beautiful line.
Okay, wait a minute. I don't know if people understand that. Because it's fabric and it's lightweight, it
Yes,
has to be weighted or it just flaps around with the air conditioning or whatever and runs into other things or billows. And so it has to has to be the exact right tautness,
right.
which is done with a weight in a heavy pipe that holds the bottom of it steady, right?
Right, which you also have to be careful, you know, when you have people on the stage that it doesn't come down and clonk them on the head. But I made these exterior, well, the shop made these beautiful exterior, the actual pipe was slid on top of the drop so that
Uh-huh.
the sleeve, and you could see this half round that was colored enamel. So it just made
Uh-huh.
one more very precise, very beautiful edge.
Right. And so the portals, the sides, the ins and outs part, I'm doing this on the screen where people go when you don't see them,
Yes.
also comes, right? It sort of
They
telescopes in.
they perspected in Ala and Alber's print. And
Right.
that's why, and because of that, and the reason for that was that what I wanted was a color to be reflected on the panel behind it. So if the portals were straight up and down, that wouldn't have happened. But if you had a scrim color in front of a perspective drop, then it actually would reflect a
Right.
different color on the panel behind.
Which it does gorgeously. But also, I keep forgetting this, the theater where we first did it, the Théâtre de la Monnaie, has a raked stage.
Oh my God, that's right.
So the floor already goes like this, which dancers don't particularly, dancers post 19th century don't like those very much.
Right.
So the floor does this, and then the same thing happens with the portal. So there's this sort of oh, sorry, I'm doing my face, but there's this incredible depth that happens, as similar to the effect in the hard nut, in that it was also on a rake, so it does this. But because of these, it could be very complicated to look at with a bunch of different colors in a busier one, with sometimes contrasting color stripes, then the floor, which is a very pale gray that looks white, all of this stuff. And I wanted the dancers to look like they were outside when they needed to. So I needed like wind without a wind machine. And that turned into sort of, I don't know, William Blake, Isadora Duncan styled classical early 20th century, you know, sheath dresses and costumes that were made by Christine Van Loon. And we did a bright set and a dimmer set, so that there was, you know, L'Allegro and Penseroso and mix and match. All the women are in two different colored dresses that go from sort of darker and more somber autumnal in the first act, and then they switch to the same costumes but in brighter hues. And so it does this wonderful sort of trailing, and I on purpose didn't want the costumes to match the set. Otherwise it can turn into camouflage, like people can just disappear. So they're kind of off, but they work with each other. And the brilliant lighting that James Ingalls did, which augments all of that, well, enlightens all of that. And that's built in. So there's various opacities and translucencies in the fabric as well. So it's like, you know, so it's Apollonian and Dionysian all at the same time.
Wow. I just remember that during the Czech rehearsals, during our breaks, they would serve us champagne and sandwich in the grand foyer. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. It was not like
gorgeous.
Yeah, not like anything I had experienced in America, where they never serve you champagne and sandwich during Czech rehearsals. Yeah. Painting has always been an influence on me. I mean, mostly everything I did was inspired by some other painter, and then I became a painter myself. And when we did Assis and Galatea, I actually used my own paintings for the scenery, and that was also a very complex set of grimy, layered, opaque, translucent combination of things.
And that was also that's Isaac Mizrahi designed that. and
Great.
he took patterns from your plein air paintings and turned them into the fabric that became the costumes. That was a complicated show.
That was, yeah, that was too complicated.
It was a lot, and it turned out gorgeously. But I don't say the show must go on, but the show must go on, really. Eventually it's time. So I just remembered something that you said. Something when you had just really become re-obsessed with painting, because you had told me long ago that you didn't like to paint en plein air because there's too much green, because just everything is just green. And then years later, you were making paintings that were nothing but greens.
Green, yeah. Yeah, no, and I've continued to do that, except this fall I did a whole series of fabulous fall color paintings. They're really wonderful.
Oh, great.
See them sometime. And I work small in the field because I'm out in the field, and then I blow them up to a bigger size in my studio.
What do you mean, you repaint them in a bigger size?
Repaint
Oh,
them.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant blow it up like a Xerox machine.
I'm doing insane needle points from them. That's how I've spent my quarantine, is I've now done 6 needle points of my paintings, and I'm working on the 7th one, and I'm going to show them sometime, but they take.
Are they this big? Are they the size of a cameo or something?
No, they're this big, but the
wow,
tiny, tiny.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they are. They're they're really, it's upsetting that I have spent so much time doing them.
Hey, Adrianne.
Yeah.
How about coming back and revisiting as an audience person, if you can look beyond what's happening with the scrims and stuff?
Very hard.
I know it is.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Do you wish you'd changed everything in retrospect or anything like that?
I wouldn't change a thing. And it makes me always very sentimental about my time in Brussels, which was, as you know, a very emotional time for me, because after the intense experience of working on Allegro closely with the stage manager, we fell in love and had a romance for a year, which didn't end well. But I always go back. I always go back to those days.
Oh, great. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah.
Well, for me, when I watch it,
yeah,
I'm not looking for mistakes. I fix those, like, oh, damn, that should have been on the other leg. That was done a long time ago. And I'm still not positive what's going to come next in the sequence when I watch it.
Yeah.
And my breath is caught by the Gesamtkunstwerk, but also just, all of that. But the dancing and the navigating of the terrain is magic. It's like, it's just a thought that happens, even though there's a million things going on. It's like, oh, just when it's getting dark and sad, it becomes something else. Like, wait a minute, where did that come from? And I actually feel that when I watch it. Adrianne Lobel, I'm so happy to see you after such a long spell and such a long relationship. And I want to thank you for all of the gorgeous work you're doing. And we'll look to the future that may continue in some way. And you're great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Mark. It's been a pleasure.